National Pollinator Week. This is Asheville celebration, and we call ours Pollination Celebration. And Asheville is the first bee city USA. Now there are 10 cities, and the latest city to join us is Wilmington. No, Seattle's not the latest. Wilmington, North Carolina is a brand new city, and Hendersonville joined us recently. Seattle joined us recently. It's a growing movement across the country. We're just so happy that all these people across America are trying to think of ways that we can actually make our urban areas and our country as a whole friendlier to pollinators. So thank you. Okay, that's going to come in the next couple of days.
But it's my own.
Ypsilanti is going to be joining the list in the next couple of days. So, you know, a huge part of what's going on with the bees is having healthy habitat. Plenty of floral sources for the pollinators, and we talk about bees a lot, but we also talk about all the pollinators, the butterflies, the hummingbirds, the beetles, the flies, the wasps. Even the wasps are important pollinators. But the reason we chose the name bee is because they actively collect pollen. So while the other pollinators brush up against the pollen and transfer it from flower to flower and do that beautiful job of pollination that makes our world bloom and fruit, it's the bee that actually collects the pollen because it provides their protein source. It's their only source of protein, and the nectar is their source of carbohydrates. So we sure love our bees. Yeah. How many beekeepers do we have in the room? Oh, quite a few. Yay. So it's a great journey to get to know your bees. And that's the joy that honeybees bring us. But we're also quite fond of the native bees. But those bees would starve to death if it weren't for flowers and the plants that grow those flowers. We have a couple of pioneers in the native plant nursery field in this room tonight. They came here back decades ago and started Sandy Mush Herb Nursery, the Janes. Would y'all stand up? We're so grateful to our native nurseries for supplying the plants that we need if we're going to support our native pollinators. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Before you leave tonight, I hope you'll take a schedule, if you don't already have one, of the remaining events in Pollinator Week. It will continue through this Sunday, and there's lots more to come. Tomorrow night we're going to have Wings of Life at the Fine Arts Theater, so please come out. It will take your breath away. My goodness, what a movie. So enough about the rest of the week. Tonight, our special treat is Mark Winston. I hope you've been reading about him. I hope you've read some of his books. Some of his most recent book is in the back if you'd like to get a copy before you leave. He is a treasure. He's an American by birth and now living in Canada. He lives in Vancouver and teaches at the university there. He spent 30 years of his life studying honeybees around the world and teaching his students good insights and good information that brings some kind of understanding to the world we're in now and the problems that bees face. And it's hard to get those kind of insights in the world we live in. The media tends to gloss over a lot of the information and oversimplify it, and he really breaks it down and takes the complexity apart so that you can understand it. So we've had the great good fortune of having Mark with us here since Monday. I got to hike with him, got to eat barbecue at 12 Bones. It's been such a joy to have him here. We're enriched by having Mark Winston come to Asheville. So please join me in welcoming Mark Winston.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. It is such a pleasure to be in Asheville. Probably 50 years ago, I read Thomas Wolfe's book, Look Homer an Angel. Changed my life. Amazing book. And I've wanted to come to Asheville ever since. and just somehow never made it. So for me, this trip was a pilgrimage to honor the great writer, and I went to the Wolf House today, and that was just awesome. And you all have been the most generous of hosts. I've had a great time since I've been here. I want to talk to you today about my book, Bee Time, Lessons from the Hive. And there's a few books left at the back. I'll be signing at the end if anybody would be interested. I'm going to talk about what I learned from bees. The book is about what we can learn from bees about the environment. It's about our human role in nature. It's about human societies and endeavors. It's about how we work together, how we can collaborate and communicate better. And it's about management and how we overmanage the world around us and how we have to learn to be in a little better balance with the ecological services that nature can provide. I hope what I have to say tonight inspires you, as it has me, from what I've learned about bees. I'm going to do a little bit of reading from the book and then do a bit of talking about some of the lessons that I've learned. But I want to start with a reading about the title, Bee Time. It's an odd title, and it came to me one day, and I think we'll start with it. Walking into an apiary is intellectually challenging and emotionally rich, sensual and riveting. Time slows down. Focus increases. Awareness heightens. All senses captivated. Lifting my smoker, I am totally in the present, but also connected to memories of friends, fellow beekeepers, and innumerable long days in other apiaries when we shared periods of tedium, hard physical labor, and occasional glimpses of wisdom. These moments of understanding, penetrating the complexity of our usually unfathomable natural world, still take my breath away. I remember my first breathtaking moment of revelation, a much anticipated apiary visit that turned out to be nothing like I had expected. My advisor had just received a grant to study African honeybees in South America. I heard South America, thought bees would do just fine, and soon found myself in French Guiana in July 1976, entering an apiary of killer bees. I had completed an exhausting trip only the day before, from Kansas to Miami to Martinique to Cayenne, French Guiana, and was disoriented. My experience with bees up to then consisted of a few brief trips to the university's local apiaries, and I had no idea what to expect. I entered the South American apiary wearing a layer of clothes under a bee suit, my head covered by a veil, my hands inside gloves, believing I was fully protected from what I thought would be an onslaught of wrathful bees. I removed the lid with the first hive. The bees were surprisingly calm, gentle, going about their business. There was no onslaught. My fear dissipated, and I began to pay attention to the activity in the hive. The gloves came off, then the veil. I pulled out the frames one by one to inspect the combs. It was one of those moments in life when everything shifts. It's a full-body experience being among the bees. First you hear the sound, the low hum of tens of thousands of female workers flying in and out of their hives, each circling the apiaries to get her bearings, and then heading off purposefully in a literal beeline towards blooming flowers. Smells and textures bombard the senses next. The sweet odors of beeswax and honey, the stickiness of plant resins collected by the workers to plug holes and construct the base of their combs. And then there are the bees themselves, walking over your hands and forearms as you lift and return combs from the hive. The subtlest of touches as their claws lightly cling and release, the gentlest of breezes as their wings buzz before taking flight. Underlying all the physical sensations are collaboration and order, communication and common purpose, each bee submerging her individual nature for the colony. I have spent a considerable portion of my life in apiaries, no matter whether in a jungle or city, next to a freeway or by the most scenic of creeks, fields, forests, or weedy vacant lots. Entering an apiary has never failed to engage my senses and focus my attention. In these places, I learned powerful lessons from the bees about how we humans can better understand our place in nature, engage people and events with greater focus and clarity, interact more intensely in our relationships and communities, and open our hearts and minds to a deeper understanding of who we are as individuals, communities, and as species. Not then, not until long after I had left the apiaries behind. that I come to think of these apiary moments as bee time. We were the Killer Bee team. We got these T-shirts made to boost our morale in French Guiana. And shortly after we got the T-shirts made, we ended up back in Kansas at the time when this movie, The Swarm, came out. And it had great stars, Henry Fonda, Richard Widmark, every star in Hollywood seemed to be in the movie. And we were expecting that this movie would take the world by storm. We had this great idea that a couple of days after it opened, we were going to walk into the movie theater wearing our Killer Bee team T-shirts. People would think we were great heroes for saving the world from Killer Bee. So we put our shirts on, went to the 7 o'clock showing, walked in, and there was like nobody there. The movie was a total flop and it closed within about 3 days. But I did spend my formative years with bees, with the African bees in South America. You can see in a lot of situations they're gentle, especially in these small colonies. I love this slide because those glasses, which unfortunately I got rid of, they are so hip these days. Those are the hipster glasses of hipsters. Everywhere we were, there were bees, swarms. There's a swarm coming in our front window. We were just in bee heaven. Swarms flying across everywhere. Here's my advisor, Chip Taylor, snuggling up next to a swarm of killer bees. If any of you are thinking of becoming a graduate student, about 15 minutes before the swarm was taken, I, as a graduate student, was sent 50 feet up a mango tree that was infested with biting ants with a machete in order to hack at that limb and drop it with a swarm of killer bees so my advisor could get his picture taken. That's more or less what it's like to be a graduate student. But the bees were feral, they were wild. We were studying bees in their natural habitat. And most people up to that point had studied bees from a management point of view. And our viewpoint was to think of bees as a feral organism. Even today, bees are probably the most feral organism that's being kept for agriculture. They are pretty much unaltered from what you would find in the wild. And we got a unique window into the life of bees in nature. We also got a unique window into their stinging behavior. Here's Garb when he forgot to plug up a hole in his bee bill one day. He got 5 or 6 stings. The sting of a bee, of a killer bee, is no different than the sting of a regular bee. You can see the barbs. They scissor into your flesh. The bee pulls away and dies, but it leaves a stinger behind, which keeps throbbing for about 30 to 60 seconds, pumping in venom. What's really unique about the African bees is sometimes they have massive stinging attacks. And we had a U.S. Department of Agriculture camera crew come down one day, and they were interested in filming the defensive behavior of the African bee. So we set up a hive. They got their camera, it's all set up in front. We suited them up in 2 layers of clothes and a bee suit, and gloves, and veils. Got the camera rolling. Then we kicked the hive. And within seconds, you can see each one of those dots is a sting. Thousands of bees came out. These bees can be extremely defensive, which is a very good trait if you live in the wild. The guys were with us for about 10 days, and the very last day they were packing up the car to leave. And one of the cameramen pulled me aside and said, "Mark, I've got kind of an unusual problem. I've got a couple of young boys at home, and I've been down here for 10 days, and I've never been stung. Can you help me?" So I reached over and I grabbed a bee from a flower and I stung him so he could go back and tell his boys he'd been stung by a killer bee. And he said, "Thank you, thank you." I learned a lot from this experience. I learned to have an incredible respect for introduced species and for how much they affect and impact the environment around them. Did you know that 98% of American crops came from elsewhere? 98% of the food that's grown in the United States of America did not originate here. Introduced species have had a huge impact on the world around them. We talk about nature and natural ecosystems, but we have to recognize that most of what's out there today, a large part of it in cropland and in the wild, was imported. So I've learned a lot about the importance of introduced species. I also learned that honeybees are essentially a feral organism. The African bee was so successful because it was beautifully pre-adapted to the South American climate. It swarms often, makes swarms many times when it swarms, travels long distances. There's probably now something like 100 million colonies of African bees in South and Central America and southern United States today. I also learned about the power of research as a tool to understand the natural world. And for me, it was a template where studying bees in the context of their environment revealed to me that science, done well, can reveal insights about nature that inform our understanding and enjoyment of the natural world, and also inform our ideas about if and how to manage it. Well, we fast forward to today, and bees are in trouble. Honeybees, wild bees, they're disappearing. This last year alone, 42% of the colonies in the United States died from 2013 to 2014. In the old days, when I started beekeeping, if you lost 5 to 10% of your colonies a year, that was getting to be a high number. So you can see that honeybees are in trouble, and as we'll see, wild bees are as well. Some of the reasons have to do with the way we keep bees. And by the way, the reasons that honeybees are dying is not due to any one factor, but it's due to a whole series of things that are interacting in the perfect storm of issues for bees. Commercial beekeeping is one problem. We truck bees all over the United States in these trucks to pollinate crops, sometimes 4 or 5 or 6 crops in a row, beginning with almonds in California. 60% of American bees all over the United States are trucked into almonds in February. That's 1.5 or 1.6 million colonies of bees. That's amazing. And it's really can be quite hard on the bees. When you move them into something like almond orchards, this is what you see. Bees on pallets, the almonds in bloom. Can anybody tell me, from a bee's point of view, what is wrong with this picture?
Monoculture.
It's monoculture. There is nothing there but almonds. I want you to imagine going into a grocery store. This is usually what you see. But imagine if you went into a grocery store and there was nothing there but oranges, and it's all you had to eat for 2 weeks. And then you were moved halfway across the country, went to another grocery store where all there were chickens. And you had to cook those and eat them, and that was it. That's essentially the problem the bees are facing, is they have very limited nutritional sources when they go into these vast monocrop systems of farming. And so that is one very significant problem for honeybees and for wild bees. Beekeepers have dealt with this problem in the past by feeding things like pollen supplement. They might be soy-based or fish meal-based, lots of different bases. And we used to think this was a great practice. You feed the bees the pollen supplement, the colony raises a lot more young bees, it grows in the spring, and then you've got lots of bees. Well, it turns out that this poor nutrition, the combination of pollen supplements and going into a monocrop, is really actually quite detrimental to bees. The poor nutrition that bees are now faced with results in them having diminished immune responses and diminished capacity to detoxify pesticides. And as you'll see in a minute, there's been an outbreak of diseases, viruses, pests, all kinds of things that are making this reduced nutritional state a real problem. Maybe 30 or 40 years ago, bees could have survived it, but today, this is one of the big issues that bees are facing. Another issue is the varroa mite. These mites were imported, another introduced species. They themselves, they feed on bees. They're directly probably not that harmful, but they transmit a lot of viruses and they trigger those viruses to activate. And it's those diseases that have been the most significant problem for bees. And beekeepers have become just like farmers in overusing pesticides. We put all kinds of miticides into colony to kill varroa. The varroa becomes resistant, and before you know it, we've got a problem. But it's not only resistance that has been an issue. We are learning from bees some extraordinarily significant and important things about pesticides. When synthetic pesticides were first introduced, we had this idea. We're going to spray these on the fields, we're going to kill pests, we're going to grow lots of food, There will be no harmful side effects. Pesticides are going to be the savior of modern civilization. We fast forward to today. The United States alone, 1.2 billion pounds of pesticides are sprayed every year. That's about 3.5 pounds for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Every one of you, 3.5 pounds of pesticides. These are very, very toxic substances. These are not benign. And it's not surprising that they've made their way into beehives. A typical beehive will have anywhere from 5 to 25 pesticides in it. And present at, each one may be present at low concentrations, but they interact with each other to form the perfect storm for bees. And here's what happens. There's this phenomenon called synergy. Synergy means that 1 plus 1 does not equal 2. It equals 3 or 4 or 5 or 10. You can take very small amounts of a single pesticide and it's not going to do very much. But if you take tiny amounts of 3 or 4 pesticides and you combine that with a virus or a fungus infection or a bacteria, it's going to be lethal. And this is exactly what's happening to bees. They're exposed to pesticides, which are having all kinds of effects, and the result of that has been honeybee colonies collapsing. The effects are behavioral. Bees exposed to these pesticide disease interactions are having sublethal effects where, for instance, they lose their ability to orient. So they go out to find a flower, they can't find their way home. And they're less active. Bees exposed to pesticides are just less active than bees not exposed. So we have behavioral issues. Then we have immune system issues. Bees exposed to multiple pesticides in this poor nutrition state that they're in, get a disease, and they can't fight it very successfully because their immune system capacity is diminished. And finally, detoxification of pesticides themselves. Bees, like us, have systems in which they can detoxify chemicals like pesticides. But being exposed to pesticides reduces your ability to do that detoxification, so you become much more sensitive. So that's what's happening to bees. It's this interaction of nutrition, of commercial beekeeping, moving lots of colonies, spreading diseases and pests, of pesticides, and many pesticides in small doses, interacting with this new environment of multiple diseases, pests, and parasites. There's some really important issues to learn here. For one thing, we have no idea of the effects of small amounts of pesticide on us. This has never been studied. We know more about bees than any other organism on Earth about these multiple small dose pesticide interactions. These are turning out to be the model system. And we really need to begin doing some studies on humans to find out, and other organisms besides bees, to find out just what's happening when we're exposed to lots of small doses of lots of things. We can also learn a lot about the human pride of hubris, that we can manage anything on Earth. The problems we're seeing began small. We got a problem, we started to manage it. The management caused the problem, so we started to manage the management of the problem. And before you know it, we're into these complex management paradigms that are just no longer supportable. There's also a message here that I've learned, and learned from the bees, that we need to reduce chemical use. We simply use way too many pesticides. Even if we reduce pesticide use by 50%, we would be far, far ahead. And yet, pesticide use is going up, not going down. We are just not dealing effectively with the overuse of chemicals as a society. And we need to learn about that beekeeping must change. Last night I talked about some audacious ideas for how beekeeping might change to work in this very different environment that we just really haven't caught up yet. And in a minute I'll tell you about another thing that we've learned that is involved in colony collapse, and that is how agriculture has to change. We did some research on genetically modified crops. As far as we know, Genetically modified crops don't have any kind of toxic effect on bees. Maybe they do, but there's nothing known, there's been no demonstration of any genetically modified crop that in any way affects bee behavior, immune system, anything else. But they're having an extraordinarily significant effect on bees nonetheless. And that's because of the herbicide-tolerant GM crops. Herbicide-tolerant means that you can spray an herbicide while the crop is in the field, kills all the weeds, and the crop will be fine. This is an enormously effective way of killing weeds, which kills the main diverse food sources for bees, not only honeybees, but wild bees as well. This is a big problem. Because of agriculture, we've lost about 150 million acres of bee-friendly habitat since 1992. 2/3 of that is due to one chemical, glyphosate. 100 million pounds of glyphosate, Roundup, are sprayed in the United States every year. And it's really effective, and it kills all that forage that bees might use. That's an area, it affects an area about 4 times the size of Indiana. The new Obama program, by the way, promises to restore 7 million of those acres, which is a good, small first step. But considering that 150 million acres have been lost, we really have a long way to go. I want to tell you about a little research project we did, not studying honeybees, but studying wild bees. Bees like these bumblebees, solitary bees that nest in the ground or nest in twigs, hollow stems. And we worked on canola. The question we asked was, are bees more or less diverse and abundant, wild bees now, are they more or less diverse and abundant in organic canola, in genetically modified canola, or in conventional canola? And we did a wonderful study that showed organic canola had the most bees, conventional canola was in the middle, and the GM canola that's herbicide treated had very few bees. But we went on to ask the question, does it have any economic effects? And we discovered an extraordinary thing. A typical farm in Alberta, which is where we did this study, Alberta, Canada, at the end of the day, a typical farm in which a farmer plants 100% of their field is going to make $27,000 profit. A farmer who planted 70% of the field, left the rest fallow for weeds to grow up in, is going to make $65,000 profit, about 2.5 times as much. And the reason was quite simple, the difference. The farmer who only planted 70%, left 30% free, had greatly increased numbers of bees, more diverse and more abundant. Those bees pollinated the canola, pollination increased the yield. This was an incredible example of the importance of ecological services, how less is more, how we overmanage systems to the point where we're pushing them so hard that we're not taking advantage of these natural pollinators. We can grow enough food with moderately sized agriculture that's better integrated with natural systems, in which we're taking advantage of ecological services like bees. If you look at that situation we talked about earlier in almonds, there's a lot of research going on now showing that you can plant hedgerows and do all kinds of things to increase the number of wild bees, which again is going to diminish the need for honeybees, create a more diverse pollination service, and in the end, create a much healthier habitat. It's also a reminder that we as beekeepers, and those of us interested in wild bees, need to build new coalitions to protect our bees. We need to ally ourselves not with big farming, not with the pesticide companies, but with organic farmers, with sustainable farmers, with the slow food movement, with environmental groups, with wild bee enthusiasts. Those are our natural allies, much more than big agriculture. This is the kind of canola field that we want to promote. Yes, we're growing canola, but you can see there's lots of land around in which bees can nest and in which other plants grow that bees can feed on. We've also learned a tremendous amount from bees in the city. We did a project called the Once Upon a Bee Project. These 2 girls, Elise and Desiree, I call them girls because they were in 11th grade when they came to my lab. They were doing a project on tobacco, finding alternative uses for tobacco as smoking was diminishing. I don't know why they were in my lab, because I don't smoke and I don't know anything about tobacco, but somehow they ended up in my laboratory. And that particular day, there was a talk being given in my biology department about wild bees in the city of Phoenix. And at the end of the talk, I went back to my office, and Elise and Desiree came running in, incredibly enthusiastic. We want to do that, we want to do that, we want to study wild bees in the city. And my first thought was, okay, how can I get rid of these girls? So I said, well, if you're going to do that, we need money, you'd have to have a grant, so, sorry. And they left. They came back 2 days later with one of the best grants I've ever seen. It was called the Once Upon a Bee Project. And it started with a fairy tale. And I don't know if any of you are scientists and have submitted grants, but I can tell you, you do not start a grant with a fairy tale. It does not usually go over very well. It was about, once upon a bee, there were lots of bees in the city of Vancouver, then development happened, and they went on to weave this beautiful story. But it also had great science in it. They wanted to study the diversity and abundance of wild bees in the city. And they wanted to have a big education program to inform people about the importance of bees and what they can do in their own backyards. These two girls were almost 2 decades ahead of the rest of us. This is the kind of stuff that's going on now. Elise and Desiree were doing it 20 years ago before it really became a big thing. So I took a look at this grant and I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't have dismissed these two so quickly. And we took the grant and we submitted it, and we got $70,000. And they did the Once Upon a Bee project. And they discovered some really interesting things. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of habitats in bees that are not, in cities that are not good for bees. This kind of lawn, not good for bees. By the way, people ask me all the time, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do to help the bees? And the first thing I tell them is, don't mow your lawn. Let that dandelion grow, let the clover pop up. Mow your lawn after things are flowering, not during. I'm seeing you guys laughing in the back there. Have you been mowing your lawns?
My lawn is so bushy.
Yeah, good, bushy lawn. Habitats like this are not good for bees. There is a lot of concrete, asphalt, it's not good for bees. But in cities, there's a surprising amount of great bee habitat. Backyards, empty lots, railroad and road rights of way, undeveloped areas. It turned out that bees in the city of Vancouver, and this is true for most cities, are more diverse and abundant than bees outside the city. And again, it's because of this habitat diversity, nesting diversity for wild bees, food diversity for wild bees, and also because most municipalities these days don't use pesticides. So it's a great, great environment for bees. And that's one of the things that Elise and Desiree discovered. Beekeeping today in the city is becoming incredibly popular. Wild bees, people are trying to promote them, but also with honeybees. This is a hive of honeybees on the roof of the Fairmont Waterfront Hotel in Vancouver. And this is the Fairmont's beekeeper all suited up in his Fairmont beekeeper bee suit. The Fairmont hotels have bees now on the roof of almost all their hotels, and they're doing this wonderful international programs promoting bees and bee hotels. Honeybees and wild bee nests as well. But I wanted to tell you about the Fairmont because it also led I interviewed the chef at the Fairmont, and it led to a really interesting relationship. The Fairmont Hotel in downtown Vancouver, it's a 5-star hotel, very expensive, pretty upper end, not the kind of place that you would walk into if you came from a less privileged part of society. And yet only a few blocks away is the downtown east side of Vancouver, Canada's poorest postal code. This area is replete with every social problem you can imagine. Poverty, homelessness, addiction, lots of people with mental health issues. And yet there's a group in the area called Hives for Humanity that has started a beekeeping program in the downtown east side of Vancouver. They have well over 100 hives now and many participants. People from the community work the bees. It gives them a feeling of accomplishment, a sense of community. It gives them a feeling of calm. They all say, these are people who are really jittery on the street, but they walk into the apiary and they just slow down. And it gives them an identity as the beekeepers of the community. Well, I connected the Fairmont with Hives for Humanity, and Fairmont has become a supporter and a partner with Hives for Humanity. staff from the Fairmont go to the downtown east side. When we did my book launch for Beat Time, we invited Highest Humanity to come to the Fairmont Hotel. You know, these are people who would not normally walk into the Fairmont, and yet they were comfortable coming in because they built relationships. And the Highest Humanity is now managing the bees in the Fairmont. So I've learned a lot from bees in the city. First of all, I've learned never underestimate students who walk into your office. I haven't done it since. I learned my lesson. I learned that nature is all around us, even in the cities, and it's really important as we get increasingly separated from the wild places to maintain that nature, whether we're wealthy people or whether we're impoverished. And I've learned about how bees can build bonds in human communities. The beekeeping world crosses all economic divides, crosses all cultural divides, and the relationships that I've seen develop between the Fairmont and Highest Humanity give me hope that we can break down a lot of the inequality situations that really afflict our society. It just reaches across everyone and builds those kinds of broad communities that we all need. And I think beekeeping and the way we deal with honeybees can really learn a lot from the many, many beekeepers in the city who are taking over this idea that bees are an integral and important part of nature. I've also learned a lot about art, and through art, about bees. Bees, I come from Canada, so this is important. These are hockey skates. And this was the artwork of Agnetha Dick, who's, one of her things she does is put objects into beehives. Here's Agnetha doing some of her work. This is her most famous piece, the wedding dress. This was a wedding dress that was put into a giant plexiglass box, and bees were put in and allowed to build a comb around it. It's in the National Gallery of Canada, kept in a special air-conditioned room. So she's quite an accomplished artist. And working with Agnetha, I learned a lot about the power of collaboration and seeing bees through a very different lens of an artist. I've also had the opportunity to work with dancers. This is a project called Symbiosis. It's a project about symbiotic relationships and interaction and how we all depend upon each other. A few minutes before this photo was taken, in rehearsals, the scene was that those two dancers, beautiful dancers, I can't even begin to describe how wonderful they were standing over there, and I was a scientist over here, commenting upon them. And the choreographer had told us, if there's ever a point during rehearsal where you want to do something different, try it out. So I walked over and I intertwined with the dancers. It became a key moment in the piece, this idea of science and art intertwining, very powerful. The first time we performed Symbiosis, and we performed it all across Canada, the first time we performed this dance, the lighting was such that we could not see if there was an audience. They were black to us. So I had no idea whether there was even anybody there. And we did our dance. It was very, very powerful and moving performance. And then we came up to the front of the stage to take our bows, and the lights came up. It was a moment. You know how sometimes when a performance is so powerful that nobody moves at the end of it, nobody claps? Well, it was a full house of people just sitting there, many of them with tears streaming down their face. That was a powerful moment for me in understanding how we communicate science. It's another thing I've learned from the bees, is that science is not only about reports or facts or figures. It's about emotion. It's about deep feeling. It's about really caring for the world around you. And we as scientists can really benefit from getting involved with artists and using these artistic models as a stronger and more powerful way to communicate science. I've also learned that I'm not a particularly good dancer. It was really quite an experience working on stage with dancers. Getting up in front of a group like you, or I've gotten up and talked to groups of sometimes thousands of people in an auditorium. No fear at all, doesn't bother me in the least. But I'll tell you, when I was that first night when I was on stage with these dancers, I was terrified. You know, it's just so, because you have to do everything right. If you move the wrong way, the wrong time, you throw the whole thing off. There was a moment, a number of performances later in Toronto, where we were using a sound person that we weren't used to. And the scene was that I was on stage at the beginning sitting in a chair, the dancer was moving, and I gradually get up and start mimicking her dances. And then the music starts and we go off stage. So we started doing this, and a point comes where the music was supposed to start. And the sound guy didn't get the cue, so there was no music. And so I had no idea what to do. And I did the right thing though, I just followed the dancer. And it was another one of those great moments of collaborative interaction, where there was so much trust between us on stage that we could improvise, and nobody in the audience had any idea that we were doing it. It was quite the experience. Well, I want to finish with 2 short readings. We do produce honey at my university. Heavenly Honey is our brand. And I'd like to do a little bit of a reading about our honey. And then I'll finish with one other short reading. For close to 30 years, we produced Heavenly Honey at the university where I was teaching, selling more than 10,000 pounds a year from up to 200 colonies. Our primary product was research data, but I'm a pretty fair beekeeper, and honey sales generated enough income to support a few scholarships each year. Our apiaries were out in the Fraser Valley, a gently rolling floodplain where the majestic Fraser River emerges from British Columbia's high mountains and steep canyons, and flows to the complex estuary south of Vancouver, then out to the Straits of Georgia and the Pacific Ocean. It's a narrow, fertile valley about 60 miles long, with pastures supporting a thriving dairy industry up against the mountains, and extensive raspberry, blueberry, and cranberry fields and market gardens farther along in the western valley, closer to Vancouver. We were tutored in valley history, natural and human, by the honey it produced and the residents we encountered. We had our favorite apiaries, each with its own distinctive geological and floral character, as well as links to the early settlers from the past and quirky human inhabitants in the present. My favorite apiary was Florence's. A bee yard passed from best beekeeper in the valley to best beekeeper in the valley for close to 100 years. And as a young researcher just beginning my career, I considered it a deep honor to have it passed on to us. Florence herself lived there for most of her life. She was in her 80s when we met, having raised her family in the ramshackle house she still inhabited. Now she lived on her own, husband deceased, children long gone, with an old black Labrador retriever and a cow she kept in the pasture next to her apiary. A stop to check in with Florence was mandatory on each visit. Somehow she always seemed to know we were coming, and had tea ready with her freshly baked peanut butter cookies. With, by the way, the secret ingredient for her Florence's famous peanut butter cookies was bacon fat drippings. Our bees were shaded under gnarled and spindly apple trees that, although abandoned for some time, had once been part of a producing orchard. Nearby were chicken and llama farms, but more important for the bees were the blueberry and raspberry fields, vegetable gardens, and a considerable amount of meadowland that provided dandelion, clover, fireweed, and other wildflower nectar sources for the bees. Maple trees dotted the landscape, providing the season's first serious nectar each April. Florence and the other landowners loved having the bees and the free buckets of honey we paid as rent each year, connecting them to their own land and providing an identity as the beekeeping landlords in their community. Our bees informed them about what was growing on their own and nearby property, and evoked reflections about what had been there before. Sandwiches and cookies, as well as coffee on a cold day and cold drinks when it was hot, were shared along with conversation about whatever fascinating things our bees were doing that day. Chats about bees were accented with local politics, the latest antics of strange neighbors, and the growing importance of conserving natural and farm land as urban sprawl staked its tendrils into rural life. Our apiaries became local landmarks, inspiring directions to go about 3 minutes along such and such road and turn left at the first intersection after the bees.
The owner's trips to the local stores were punctuated with their neighbors' queries about how the bees were doing and when the honey would be ready for sale. A jar of heavenly honey carried with it our gratitude to the bees for collaborating in the harvest. The flowers that yielded the nectar, the land itself, which provided a sense of physical place, and the human personalities past and present inhabiting that land. The core, what I learned from my 30 years of harvesting, bottling, selling, and giving away honey, is this. Food at its best carries memories and reflections that go beyond sustenance to connect the personalities who harvest and the land from which they gather, making holy the simple act of eating. I moved on from bees about 2002. I was the founding director for my university's Center for Dialogue. And we spend our time dealing with public issues, engaging the university with the community, and we do a lot of teaching with students. And I'd like to finish, a lot of people ask me, well, how did a bee guy move into this dialogue world? And I'd like to finish with just a short reading about dialogue. And I'm going to begin this reading with where I ended off at the beginning of the talk, talking about apiaries. In these places, I learned powerful lessons from the bees about how we humans can better understand our place in nature, engage people in events with greater focus and clarity, interact more intentionally in our relationships and communities, and open our hearts and minds to a deeper understanding of who we are as individuals, communities, and as species. Not then, not until long after I left the apiaries behind, did I come to think of these moments as bee time. I had become the director of my university's Center for Dialogue. My work had evolved into realms far from bees. I was facilitating discussions of the complex and nuanced issues that face contemporary human societies. The settings were classes and workshops, large public dialogues, and private one-on-one conversations, sometimes focused on adversarial and controversial public issues, sometimes on the most deeply personal and intimate reflections. A few years after I moved into this new world of human interface, I was interviewed by a journalist who noted that bees and dialogue didn't seem connected, and wondered whether they had anything in common. Absolutely, I responded. Initiating a dialogue requires the same attention as entering an apiary. Both stimulate a state of deep listening, engage all the senses, hearing without judging. Through dialogue, time slows down, as it does in apiaries. Focus sharpens on how participants are interacting. Understandings emerge, issues clarify and become connected, and collaboration surfaces from the intentions and actions of many individuals. Solitary becomes communal. Dialogue has that apiary feeling, reading situations and discerning what there is to learn from each unique constellation of persons, circumstances, and issues. Those two rare moments of presence and awareness, when deep human interactions are realized, they too are bee time. I do have a blog where I do some writing, and you're more than welcome to take a look at it. And I'm happy to spend a few minutes answering questions, and then there's still a few books left in the back. If anybody's interested, I'll be back there to sign. Yeah, the woman in the yellow shirt in the back.
Mark, thanks for coming and talking to us, and I just appreciate this so much, and there still is a lot of misconception about what's going on with pollinators, and I think this talk would be amazing on YouTube, and if it isn't already, I just want to tell you that from meeting you, please put it on there if that's possible.
Well, apparently, it will be on YouTube. I've actually I've wanted to get my talk filmed for some time, and the Bee City group has kindly arranged to film it. It will be on YouTube, and I imagine you can connect from the Bee City website. So it'll take, I don't know how long, 15 minutes from now.
And Marty, this is a good chance to thank our volunteer videographer, Dallas. Would you stand up and take it
So we'll be up on YouTube. And great coincidence that you asked that question. No, I did not plant that question in the audience. Gentleman right over here, yes, sir. Yep.
How can citizens play a role to put pressure on corporations like Ace Hardware and Lowe's to purchase plants from growers who are not using the neonicotinoids and other harmful chemicals to bees and other pollinators?
Well, the pesticide lobbies and the farm lobbies, all the corporate relationships that are involved in agriculture, is extremely powerful. And the only way to fight that is to form alliances that are equally powerful. And I've been looking and I do look in the bee community to reach out further to find those corporations that really work with us. Groups like Costco, Burt's Bees. Costco is really bee friendly. Whole Foods. There's a very large organic grower community, but there's also a fairly large and growing sustainable food community. I would look to the people in in cities who really want local food and are becoming much more attentive to where their food comes from. We need to build those alliances. And but if you think about where we were 5 years ago, where we are now, there's so much more awareness of bees. There's so much more awareness of wild bees. So much interest that as that grows, I think we'll have more of an opportunity to put the kind of pressure on the government and on corporations to do the right thing. So I'm fairly hopeful about things. I was saying last night, here's why I'm hopeful. I was saying last night that I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I left Cleveland in 1968, just after the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. Classic moment in the environmental world. And yet now, today, the river's cleaned up. There's a lot of things in the world that are better today than they were when I was young. And I think if we keep at it, we're going to be able to make the world better for pollinators too. I spend a lot of time with young people. And when you spend a lot of time with young people, you can't help but want to, but think the world is indeed going to get better. So we just have to keep at it. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking not just YouTube, but maybe a TED Talk as well. I mean, it'd be great if you could do that. But when I go to the store, I buy honey, but listening to you, it might not be good to buy commercial honey if that's what they do is carry the hives from place to place. So I just wanted to talk about that.
Well, there's honey and then there's honey. There's a chapter in my book about honey. I read you that beautiful passage. I found it beautiful. There's some other beautiful passages in there, but I've also wrote about the seamy side of honey. The largest food fraud case in American history happened with honey just a few years ago. There's imported honey that comes from places like China that's contaminated. It's often not even honey. There are American honey packers who pack high fructose corn syrup as honey. There have been $2 million fines for some of these companies. And at the other end of the spectrum, there's some wonderful artisan beekeepers who produce the finest product you can imagine. So I'm always careful when I go into the store to make sure that my honey comes locally, to make sure my honey has been produced by a beekeeper who really cares about their honey, rather than getting into the big kind of corporate packing level. And there are some fabulous beekeepers here in North Carolina. You're blessed with a very rich beekeeping community. So I would just, go when you go in the store, see where it comes from, make sure it's good North Carolina or nearby, southern honey, and then I think you'll feel much better about the product. It's a great product when it's done well, and it's a horrific product when it's adulterated. Any other questions? Yes.
Mark, you talked about the pesticides and how they affect the bees, and you also mentioned that, to your knowledge, there are no studies that have been done to look at, I'm guessing, glyphosate and the other chemicals that make up pesticides and their effect on human beings. Do you have an idea of, let's say I wanted to request that, who would it be, the U.S. Department of Agriculture? Who could I turn to that wouldn't have a foot already in the wrong door, like Monsanto, who would have a ill interest that would be a
Well, the people that regulate agriculture and food, you want to be looking at both the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Glyphosate probably has no direct human effect because it affects a particular pathway that's found in plants but not found in humans. But glyphosate affects the same pathway in bacteria. And as we're learning more and more, we are full of gazillions of bacteria of many, many different types that are critical for our digestive system, for nutrition, for the way our whole bodies function, for our immune responses. And glyphosate may well affect those. And that's just not been studied. So you can drink glyphosate and you won't die. So they say, okay, it's perfectly safe. But we don't do these holistic studies that show the subtle effects of chemicals that in the end are, they're insidious, but they're significant. I've really worked through universities. The problem with agricultural research is it's often funded by industry. It's often done by industry. And you're not allowed to see that research because it's considered proprietary, yet they're making all these regulatory decisions about it. We need to change that system. And until we do that, we're going to have a hard time getting a handle on research that's being, it's being done that we're not seeing. So I really try to work through universities to do the kind of independent research that isn't beholden to any organization.
Can you tell me, sorry, but just follow up, who holds that, the decisions on how the laws are?
Who holds the decisions? Well, the whole range of government and university cultures that interact. Granting decisions come from, there's so many different places that people get grants. There's not really a single answer to it. But I would go to your local university and say, who's funding your research and who are you beholden to? And how can we make that research more independent? Any other questions? Yes.
Okay. The state land grant university system and its relationship with cooperative extensions seems to be a serious problem because the local growers of our crops are getting their technical information from the state land grant universities, who are in turn funded by the large, corporate conglomerate chemical agricultural people. How can we begin to infiltrate that maze?
Well, you put your finger on, a really core issue. The land grant colleges, the extension agents, the whole farming system, the pesticide industry, the people who sell food and pack food, the farmers themselves, they're all in this interlocked system that pushes this one mass corporate idea of agriculture. And we're learning that it's not good for the environment, but it's also not good for food production. There are better ways to produce food more cheaply than these high-intensive, high-pesticide, high-fertilizer, mass monocrop kinds of systems. And there's no one button you can push to change that. But we need to work at all levels to get that system more focused on sustainable farming. Here's a wacky idea. United States spends, I think it's $200 or $300 billion a year in subsidies to farmers. It's a lot of money. And it mostly goes to the big farmers who grow corn and soybeans. And so it's benefiting people that are already quite wealthy. Let's take 10% of that, maybe $20 billion or $30 billion, and devote it to subsidizing sustainable farming, to subsidizing research to understand how sustainable farming can best be done, to understand how polyculture, mixed farming systems can work, to understand how you can reduce pesticide use. Not even necessarily organic. I think organic is great, and I buy organic as much as I can. Not for health reasons, but because I think it's way better for the environment. But just also sustainable farming that might not be quite as strict as organic, that still is a vast improvement over what we do today. And a few studies that have been done have shown that sustainable farming is as productive with much less environmental input than mass agriculture. But we're just locked into this system, and somehow we need to change that. Okay, I think we will wrap up here, and again, thank you so kindly for coming out tonight, and whatever support you can give to Asheville and the bee. Asheville was the world's first bee city. It's something we're very proud of here. And the whole bee city movement is taking off all across the U.S. And I'm trying to convince Phyllis to expand into Canada. And it's a wonderful, wonderful movement. And you can be very proud of being the home. So, thank you.
Thank you.